Continuing Alcibiades from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Dropped like craven cock, his conquered wing. He esteemed these endeavors of Socrates as most truly a means which the entities made use for the care and preservation of youth, and began to think meanly of himself and to admire him, to be pleased with his kindness, and to stand in awe of his virtue, and unawares to himself, there became formed in his mind that reflex image, a reciprocation of love, or enteros, that Plato talks of. It was a matter of general wonder when people saw him joining Socrates in his meals and his exercises, living with him in the same tent, whilst he was reserved and rough to all others who made their addresses to him, and acted, indeed, with great insolence to some of them, as in particular Anytus, the son of Anthemion, one whom was very fond of him, and invited him to an entertainment which he had prepared for some strangers. Alcibiades refused the invitation, but having drunk to excess at his own house with some of his companions, went thither with them to play some frolic, and standing at the door of the room where the guests were enjoying themselves and seeing the tables covered with gold and silver cups, he commanded his servants to take away the one half of them, and to carry them to his own house, and then, disdaining so much as to enter into the room himself, as soon as he had done this, went away. The company was indignant, and exclaimed at his rude and insulting conduct. Anytus, however, said, on the contrary, he had shown great consideration and tenderness in taking only a part, when he might have taken all. And if it was a lower class person who did that, they probably would have lost a hand or their life or something, He behaved in the same manner to all others who courted him, except only one stranger, who, as his story is told, having but a small estate, sold it all for about 100 staters, which he presented to Alcibiades, and besought him to accept. Alcibiades, smiling and well pleased at the thing, invited him to supper, and after a very kind entertainment, gave him his gold again, requiring him, moreover, not to fail to be present the next day, when the public revenue was offered to farm, and to outbid all others. The man would have excused himself because of the conduct was so large, and would cost so many talents, but Alcibiades, who had at that time a private pique against the existing farmers of the revenue, threatened to have him beaten if he refused. The next morning the stranger, coming to the marketplace, offered a talent more than the existing rate, upon which the farmers, enraged and consulting together, called upon him to name his sureties, concluding that he could find none. The poor man, being startled at the proposal, began to retire, but Alcibiades, standing at a distance, cried out to the magistrates, "Set my name down. He is a friend of mine, and I will be security for him." When the other bidders heard this, they perceived that all their contrivance was defeated, for their way was, with the profits of the second year, to pay the rent for the year preceding, so that, not seeing any other way to extricate themselves out of the difficulty, they had began to entreat the stranger, and offered him a sum of money. Alcibiades would not suffer him to accept of less than a talent, but when that was paid down, he commanded him to relinquish the bargain, having by this device relieved his necessity. Though Socrates had many and powerful rivals, yet the natural good qualities of Alcibiades gave his affection the mastery. His words overcame him so much as to draw tears from his eyes and disturb his very soul, yet sometimes he would abandon himself to flatterers when they proposed to him varieties of pleasure, and would desert Socrates, who then would pursue him as if he had been a fugitive slave. He despised everyone else, and had no reverence or awe for any one but him. Cleanthes the philosopher, speaking of one of whom he was attached, says, his only hold on him was by his ears, while his rivals had all the others offered them, and there is no question that Alcibiades was very easily caught by pleasure, and the expression used by Thucydides about the excesses of the habitual course of living gives the occasion to believe so. But those who endeavored to corrupt Alcibiades took advantage chiefly of his vanity and ambition, and thrust him on unceasingly to undertake the enterprises, persuading him that as soon as he began to concern himself in public affairs, he would not only obscure the rest of the generals and statesmen, but outdo the authority and the reputation which Pericles himself had gained in Greece. But in the same manner as iron which is softened by the fire grows hard with the cold, and all its parts are closed again, so as often as Socrates observed Alcibiades to be misled by luxury or pride, he reduced and corrected him by his addresses, and made him humble and modest by showing him in how many things he was deficient, and how very far from perfection in virtue. When he was past childhood, he went once to a grammar school, and asked the master for one of Homer's books, and he, making answer that he had nothing of Homer's, Alcibiades gave him a blow with his fist, and went away. Another schoolmaster, telling him that he had Homer, corrected by himself. How, said Alcibiades, and do you employ your time in teaching children to read? You who are able to amend Homer may well undertake to instruct men. Being once desirous to speak with Pericles, he went into his house, and was told there that he was not at leisure, but busied in considering how to give up his accounts to the Athenians. Alcibiades, as he went away, said it were better for him to consider how he might avoid giving up his accounts at all. Whilst he was very young, he was a soldier in the expedition against Patidae, where Socrates lodged in the same tent with him, and stood next to him in battle. Once there happened a very sharp skirmish, in which they both behaved with signal bravery, but Alcibiades, receiving a wound, Socrates threw himself before him to defend him, and, beyond any question, saved him and his arms from the enemy, and so in all justice might have challenged the prize of valor. But the generals, appearing eager to adjudge the honor of Alcibiades because of his rank, Socrates, who desired to increase his thirst after glory of a noble kind, was the first to give evidence for him, and press them to crown him, and decree to him the complete suit of armor. Afterwards, in the battle of Delium, when the Athenians were routed, and Socrates, with a few others, was retreating on foot, Alcibiades, who was on horseback, observing it, would not pass on, but stayed to shelter him from the danger, and brought him safe off, though the enemy pressed hard upon them, and cut off many. But this happened some time after. And I'm not sure about the Greek with a lot of this, so if the pronunciation is off, I'm just trying to say the spellings here in a Greek way. He gave a box on the ear to Hipponicus, the father of Hipponicus, the father of Callias, whose birth and wealth made him a person of great influence and repute. And this he did unprovoked by any passion or quarrel between them, but only because, in a frolic, he had agreed with his companions to do it. People were justly offended at this insolence when it became known through the city. But early the next morning Alcibiades went to his house and knocked at the door, and being admitted to him, took off his outer garment, and presenting his naked body, desired to scourge and chastise him as he pleased. Upon this, Hipponicus forgot all his resentment, and not only pardoned him, but soon after gave him his daughter Hippolyta in marriage. Some say that it was not Hipponicus, but his son Callias, who gave Hippolyta to Alcibiades, together with a portion of 10 talents, and that after, when she had a child, Alcibiades forced him to give 10 talents more upon pretense that such was the agreement, if she brought him any more children. Afterwards, Callias, for fear of coming to his death, by his means declared in a full assembly of the people that if he should happen to die without children, the state should inherit his house and all the goods. Hippolyte was a virtuous and dutiful wife, but at last, growing impatient of the outrages done to her by her husband's continual entertaining of courtesans, as well strangers as Athenians, she departed from him and retired to her brother's house. Alcibiades seemed not at all concerned at this, and lived on still in the same luxury, but the law requiring that she should deliver to the archon in person, and not by proxy, the instrument by which she claimed a divorce, when in obedience to the law she presented herself before him to perform this, Alcibiades came in, caught her up, and carried her home through the marketplace, no one daring to oppose him, nor to take her from him. She continued with him till her death, which happened not long after, when Alcibiades had gone to Ephesus. Nor is this violence to be thought so very enormous or unmanly. For the law, in making her who desires to be divorced appear in public, seems to design to give her husband an opportunity of treating with her and endeavoring to retain her. Alcibiades had a dog which cost him 70 minas, and was a very large one and very handsome. His tail, which was his principal ornament, he caused to be cut off, and his acquaintances exclaiming at him for it, and telling him that all Athens was sorry for the dog, and cried out upon him for this action, he laughed and said, "Just what I wanted has happened then. I wish the Athenians to talk about this, that they might not say something worse of me." It is said that the first time he came into the assembly was upon occasion of a largesse of money, which he made to the people. This was not done by design, but as he passed along he heard a shout, and inquiring the cause, and having learned that there was a donative making to the people, he went in amongst them, and gave money also, the multitude thereupon applauding him and shouting. He was so transported at it that he forgot a quail which he had under his robe, and the bird, being frightened with the noise, flew off, upon which the people made louder acclamations than before, and many of them started up to pursue the bird, and one Antiochus, a pilot, caught it and restored it to him, for which he was ever after a favorite with Alcibiades. He had great advantages for entering public life: his noble birth, his riches, the personal courage he had shown in diverse battles, and the multitude of his friends and dependents threw open, so to say, folding doors for his admittance. Getting rumbly in the tumbledy here. Stomach's pretty full for that, though. But he did not consent to let his power with the people rest on anything rather than on his own gift of eloquence. That he was a master in the art of speaking, the comic poets bear him witness, and the most eloquent of public speakers, in his oration against Medius, allows that Alcibiades, among other perfections, was a most accomplished orator. If, however, we give credit to Theophrastus, who of all philosophers was the most curious inquirer and the greatest lover of history, we are to understand that Alcibiades had the highest capacity for inventing, for discerning what was the right thing to be said for any purpose and on any occasion, but aiming not only at saying what was required, but also at saying it well, in respect that is of words and phrases. When these did not readily occur, he would often pause in the middle of his discourse for want of the apt word, and would be silent and stop till he could recollect himself, and had considered what to say. The expenses in horses kept for the public games and in the number of his chariots were matter of great observation. Never did anyone but he, either private person or king, send 7 chariots to the Olympic games, and to have carried away at once the first, the second, and the 4th prize, as Thucydides says, or the 3rd, or Euripides relates it, outdoes far away every distinction that ever was known or thought of in that kind. Euripides celebrates his success in this manner. But my song to you, son of Cleinias, is due. Victory is noble, how much more? To do as never Greek before, to obtain in the great chariot race the 1st, the 2nd, and 3rd place, with every step advance to fame, to bid the herald 3 times claim the olive for one victor's name. The emulation displayed by the deputations of various states in the presents which they made to him rendered the success yet more illustrious. The Ephesians erected a tent for him, adorned magnificently. The city of Chios furnished him with provender for his horses, and with great numbers of beasts for sacrifice. The Lesbians, not the same thing as the lesbians we talk about nowadays, sent him wine and other provisions for the many great entertainments which he made. Yet in the midst of all this he escaped not without censure, occasioned either by the ill nature of his enemies or by his own misconduct. For it is said that one Diomedes, an Athenian, a worthy man and a friend to Alcibiades, passionately desired to obtain the victory at the Olympic games, and having heard much of a chariot which belonged to the state at Argos, where he knew that Alcibiades had great power and many friends, prevailed with him to undertake to buy the chariot. Alcibiades did indeed buy it, but then claimed it for his own, leaving Diomedes to rage at him and call upon what he considered to be gods and goddesses and men to bear witness to the injustice. It would seem that there was a suit at law commenced upon this occasion, and there is yet extant an oration concerning the chariot, written by Isocrates in defense of the son of Alcibiades. But the plaintiff in this action is named Theseus and not Diomedes. As soon as he began to intermeddle in the government, which was when he was very young, he quickly lessened the credit of all who aspired to the confidence of the people, except Thrax, the son of Erasistratus and Nicias, the son of Niceratus, who alone could contest it with them. Nicias was arrived at a mature age, and was esteemed their first general. Phaeax was but a rising statesman like Alcibiades. He was descended from noble ancestors, but was his inferior, as in many other things, so principally in eloquence. He possessed rather the art of persuading in private conversation than of debate before the people, and was, as Eupolis said of him, the best of talkers and of speakers worst. There is an extent of oration written by Phaeax against Alcibiades, in which, among other things, it is said that Alcibiades made daily use at his table of many gold and silver vessels which belonged to the commonwealth, as if they had been his own. There was a certain Hyperbolus of the township Perithoeda, whom Thucydides also speaks of as a man of bad character, a general, but for the mockery of all the comic writers of the time, but quite unconcerned at the worst things they could say, and being careless of glory and insensible of shame, a temper which some people call boldness and courage, whereas it is indeed impudence and recklessness. He was liked by nobody, yet the people made frequent use of him, when they had a mind to disgrace or calumniate any persons in authority. At this time the people, by his persuasions, were ready to proceed to pronounce the sentence of 10 years' banishment, called ostracism. This they made use of to humiliate and drive out of the city such citizens as outdid the rest in credit and power, indulging not so much perhaps their apprehensions as their jealousies in this way. And when at this time there was no doubt but that the ostracism would fall upon one of those three, Alcibiades contrived to form a coalition of parties, and communicating his project to Nicias, turned the sentence upon Hyperbolus himself. Now, there's two extremes of that we don't want to get into. Is the one extreme that we look at it and say, the people that try to find fault with those of power and wealth and are, that excel in some way. And the other way, we don't want to just excuse people based on that stuff either. Because certainly, with ability comes responsibility, so we don't want to. Others say that it was not with Nicias, but Phaeax, that he consulted, by help of his party, procured the banishment of Hyperbolus when he suspected nothing less. For before that time, no means or obscure person had ever fallen under the punishment, so that Plato, the comic poet, speaking of Hyperbolus, might well say, the man deserved the fate. Denied who can, yes, but the fate did not deserve the man. Not for the like of him and his slave brands did Athens put the sherd into our hands. As much as you make these things rhyme, you can presume that they're better in the Greek. But we have given elsewhere a fuller statement of what is known to us of the matter. Alcibiades was not less disturbed at the distinctions which Nicias gained among the enemies of Athens than at the honors which the Athenians themselves paid to him. For although Alcibiades was the proper appointed person to receive all the Lacedaemonians when they came to Athens, and had taken a particular care of those who were made prisoners at Pallas, that yet after they had attained the peace and restitution of the captives, by procurement chiefly of Nicias, They paid him very special attentions, and it was commonly said in Greece that the war was begun by Pericles, and that Nicias made an end of it, and the peace was generally called the Peace of Nicias. Alcibiades was extremely annoyed at this, and being full of envy, set himself to break the league. First, therefore, observing that the Argives, as well out of fear as hatred to the Lacedaemonians, sought for protection against them, he gave them a secret assurance of alliance with Athens, and communicating as well in person as by letters with the chief advisers of the people there, he encouraged them not to fear the Lacedaemonians, nor to make concessions to them, but to wait a little, and to keep their eyes on the Athenians, who already were all but sorry they had made peace, and would soon give it up. And afterwards, when the Lacedaemonians had made a league with the Boeotians, and had not delivered up Panactum entire, as they ought to have done by the treaty, but only after first destroying it, which gave great offense to the people of Athens. Alcibiades laid hold of that opportunity to exasperate them more highly. He exclaimed fiercely against Nicias, and accused him of many things which seemed probable enough, as that, when he was general, he made no attempt himself to capture their enemies that were shut up in the isle of Sphacteria, but when they were afterwards made prisoners by others, he procured their release and sent them back to the Lacedaemonians, only to get favor with them, that he would not make use of his credit with them to prevent their entering into this confederacy with the Boeotians and Corinthians, and yet, on the other side, that he sought to stand in the way of those Greeks who were inclined to make alliance and friendship with Athens, if the Lacedaemonians did not like it. It happened at the very time when Nicias was by these arts brought into disgrace with the people, that ambassadors arrived from Lacedaemon, who, at their first coming, said what seemed very satisfactory, declaring that they had full powers to arrange all matters in dispute upon fair and equal terms. The council received their propositions, and the people were to assemble on the morrow to give them audience. Alcibiades grew very apprehensive of this, and contrived to gain a secret conference with the ambassadors. When they were met, he said, "What is it you intend, you men of Sparta? Can you be ignorant that the council always act with moderation and respect towards ambassadors, but that the people are full of ambition and great designs, so that if you let them know what full powers your commission gives you, they will urge and press you to unreasonable conditions. Quit, therefore, this indiscreet simplicity, if you expect to obtain equal terms from the Athenians, and would not have things extorted from you contrary to your inclinations, and begin to treat with the people upon some reasonable articles, not avowing yourself plenipotentiaries, and I will be ready to assist you out of good will to the Lacedaemonians." When he had said thus, he gave them his oath for the performance of what he promised, and by this way drew them from Nicias to rely entirely upon himself, and left them full of admiration of the discernment and sagacity they had seen in him. The next day, when the people were assembled and the ambassadors introduced, Alcibiades, with great apparent courtesy, demanded of them with what powers they were come. They made answer that they were not come as plenipotentiaries. Instantly upon that, Alcibiades, with a loud voice, as though he had received and not done the wrong, began to call them dishonest prevaricators, and to urge that such men could not possibly come with a purpose to say or do anything that was sincere. The council was incensed. The people were in a rage, and Nicias, who knew nothing of the deceit and the imposture, was, in the greatest confusion, equally surprised and ashamed at such a change in the men. So thus the Lacedaemonian ambassadors were utterly rejected, and Alcibiades was declared general, who presently united the Argives, the Eleans, and the people of Mantinea into a confederacy with the Athenians. No man commended the method by which Alcibiades effected all this, yet it was a great political feat thus to divide and shake almost all Peloponnesus, and to combine so many men in arms against the Lacedaemonians in one day before Mantinea, and moreover to remove the war and the dangers so far from the frontier of the Athenians, that even success would profit the enemy but little should they be conquerors, whereas if they were defeated, Sparta itself was hardly safe. After this battle at Mantinea, the select 1,000 of the army of the Argives attempted to overthrow the government of the people in Argos and make themselves masters of the city, but the Lacedaemonians came to their aid and abolished their democracy. But the people took arms again and gained the advantage, and Alcibiades came to their aid and completed their victory and persuaded them to build long walls and by that means to join their city into the sea, and so to bring wholly within reach of the Athenian power. And while they mean similar things to democracy as we do nowadays, which is obviously not the same thing,